I was born in a palace gilded with fear. My father, Saul, was Israel's first king, a man tall in stature but broken in spirit. From the moment I could walk through his marble halls, I learned that royalty is both a crown and a cage. I watched my father's temper ignite like dry straw. The servants trembled at his voice, and even the air in our palace seemed to obey him. But I learned how to hide my heart behind silence. And then I heard of him. The shepherd who killed a giant with nothing but a sling and a stone. David, son of Jesse. The one who sang songs that made even my father's torment quiet for a while. I did not meet him that day. But when his music filled our courts, something inside me awakened, a melody of courage, of hope, of something I didn't yet have a name for. It was love. Not the kind the palace understands, but the kind heaven whispers about. When I finally saw him, his eyes carried the fire of the hills and the calm of rivers. David did not bow like others. He spoke to me not as a princess, but as a woman. And I, Saul's daughter, found myself smiling again, but love in a kingdom ruled by fear is dangerous. My father, jealous of David's rising favor, turned our halls into traps. Every dinner became a battlefield of glances. Every silence, a hidden sword. One night, my father sent men to kill David in his sleep, and it was then I learned what love truly costs. That I looked at the man I loved, his hair tangled from running, his eyes heavy with confusion, and I said, "Go." He hesitated. I whispered, "If you stay, you will die." "Go, my love." I placed an image in his bed, covered it with goat's hair, and when the guards came, I lied, "He is sick." That was the night I betrayed my father, and saved my husband. But when the door closed behind David, and the echo of his steps faded, I knew, the palace would never feel like home again. Days turned to weeks, and weeks to months. David was gone. My father's wrath did not end, it burned hotter. He looked at me as if I were the wound he could not heal. I was both his daughter and his shame. So he took me and gave me to another man, Palti, son of Laish. I did not love him. How could I? My heart was still bound to the one who sang to God in the wilderness. But Palti was kind, too kind for a woman living with ghosts. He touched my hand, and I pulled away. He whispered my name, and I flinched at the sound. Because once you've known a love that sings, you cannot settle for one that merely speaks. Years later, I heard a rumor in the wind. David had become king, the boy who fled my father's rage had risen to the throne my father lost. And me, the woman who once saved him, had become a forgotten shadow. Until one day, soldiers arrived at my door. They said, "King David has sent for you." For a moment, my heart leaped. Did he still remember me? But when I stood before him, his eyes were not the eyes I once knew. They were eyes that had seen war, betrayal, and kingship. He took me from Palti's house. Palti followed us, weeping behind, but David did not look back. I sat in silence as the chariots rolled toward Jerusalem. I was a queen again. But inside, I felt like a ghost carried home by the wind. The palace doors opened once more for me, but it wasn't the home I remembered. David was king now, and the sound of worship filled his halls. But I was no longer the song in his heart. He had wives, many. Their laughter echoed down the marble corridors, and I, once his first love, became just another shadow in his royal story. I tried to speak with him, to tell him how I had waited, how I had wept, how I had been given away like a forgotten garment. But kings have little time for ghosts of the past. He smiled at me politely, like one greeting a relic from his youth. And my heart hardened quietly. I told myself I was strong, that I would not cry. But strength built on bitterness is only pride in disguise. I wore the crown again, but this time, it felt heavy. Not because of gold, but because it no longer meant love. That day, Jerusalem trembled with music. The Ark of the Covenant was returning. Trumpets roared, tambourines sang, and voices lifted toward heaven. And there, in the middle of the streets, was David. My husband. My king. He wore a simple linen ephod, not the robe of royalty, not the crown of authority, and he danced before the Lord with all his might. The people shouted, laughed, wept, and bowed. And I watched from my window. I should have rejoiced. But instead, my heart recoiled. I saw a king stripped of dignity, a man forgetting his position. But heaven saw something I did not, a worshipper who remembered who gave him the throne. I looked down at him and whispered words that would echo through eternity. How glorious was the King of Israel today, uncovering himself before the maidservants. And with that, pride sealed what love had once opened. When he returned, his face was glowing, not with pride, but with presence. He looked like a man who had touched heaven. And I, the daughter of a king, met him with sarcasm. How noble you look today, I said, dancing before your servants. His eyes met mine, steady, unyielding. He said, it was before the Lord who chose me instead of your father. Then he added, I will be even more undignified than this. Those words pierced me deeper than any sword. Because I realized. While I had been fighting for appearances, he had been fighting for worship. He walked away, and the room felt colder. The sound of his footsteps faded into the echo of a heart I no longer understood. I turned toward the window again, but the music had stopped. Only silence remained. And in that silence, I felt heaven weep for me. After that day, David never came to me again. The songs of the palace no longer called my name. The laughter of other wives filled the corridors where I once stood as queen. And I became a monument to pride. They said I had no child until the day of my death. But few knew, it was not my womb that was barren. It was my worship. I spent my years behind the same window where I had judged the king. And in that stillness, I began to see the truth. David's dance wasn't madness. It was freedom. And I, the king's daughter, had chained myself to dignity while he broke his chains before God. I had loved a man after God's heart, but I did not learn to love the God of his heart. That was my sorrow, that was my undoing. Years passed, and still, I sat by that window. The city changed, children grew into warriors. The sound of drums rose again, the rhythm of another generation praising God. But I, the daughter of Saul, the first queen of Israel, was a prisoner of my own heart. Sometimes, I would see David walking through the courtyards, his sons beside him, his laughter echoing like the songs he once sang. And I would feel something break inside me, not envy, but emptiness. The same window that once showed me the king dancing now became my mirror. I looked into the glass and saw not a queen, not a wife, but a woman who could not rejoice with heaven. And that was my sin. Not that I mocked him, but that I stood apart when I should have bowed. One night, I awoke to the sound of distant music. Soft, like a harp played from the hills that I knew that sound. David's harp, though the years had taken his youth, his worship never aged. And in that stillness, I felt something divine. A whisper, not of rebuke, but of mercy. It said, Michal, I saw you when you saved my anointed. I saw your love before pride took root. And I have not forgotten you. Tears streamed down my face. I realized then, God's mercy does not erase our story, it redeems it. Though I had been barren in body and in heart, his compassion still reached through my silence. I was not erased, only unfinished. Sometimes, heaven rewrites us through regret. If I could speak to every woman who will ever love a man of God, I would tell her this. Do not mistake humility for weakness. Do not let dignity silence your worship. And do not watch from the window when God invites you to the dance. I thought my place was above, in observation. But God wanted me beside, in adoration. When David danced, he wasn't performing, he was pouring. And I, the daughter of Saul, was still guarding the palace of pride. Worship is not about who sees you, it's about who you see. And I missed seeing God that day. So, if ever your heart feels too dignified to bow, remember me. Remember the woman who loved the king, but forgot the King of Kings. In my final days, I would sometimes dream. I saw the streets of Jerusalem again, filled with song, with laughter, with light. And there, in the midst of the people, David danced once more. But this time, I was not at the window. I was among them, that I was free. I was no longer the critic, I was the worshipper. And I felt what he must have felt all those years ago, that trembling joy of being seen, not by people, but by God himself. I smiled. And when I awoke, I knew, heaven had finally opened the window I closed. Maybe my name became a warning in Israel's history. But to me, it became grace. For even from the window, God still looked at me with love. When my earthly breath faded, I thought my story had ended. But the moment my eyes closed, I opened them in another world. A place where light had no shadows, and music had no beginning. There, I saw faces, women who had walked before me and after me. Hannah, whose tears became prayer. Abigail, whose wisdom saved bloodshed. Bathsheba, whose shame became lineage. And I, Michal, stood among them. The one who watched. The one who withheld. The one who finally understood. They smiled at me, not with judgment, but with knowing, because in heaven, stories are not measured by mistakes, but by mercy. Then I saw him, not David, but the king he once sang to. The one whose throne no rebellion can shake. His eyes were fire and tenderness. And when he looked at me, I fell to my knees. I said, "My Lord." I mocked the worship you loved. But he lifted my face and said, "Michal, you were not condemned, you were invited. You just didn't understand the dance." And I realized the dance was never about rhythm or movement, that it was surrender. Every twirl, every leap, every tear David shed before the ark was an act of letting go. The King of Heaven smiled. And I, who once stood still, finally bowed low. If I could return to earth for just one moment, I would tell every daughter of God this truth. Don't let your pain turn you proud. Don't let your title silence your praise. And never watch from the window when heaven is calling you to the street. Sometimes, the miracle is not in the music, but in the motion of letting go. Worship is not about perfection. It's about position. The heart bowed low before its maker. If only I had joined the dance that day, my story might have been different. But even so, his mercy danced toward me. And that is grace. That is redemption. Now I dance, not in Jerusalem's streets, but before the throne of the eternal King. There are no windows here. No walls. No pride. Only worship. The music is endless, not of harps or drums, but of hearts restored. And I move within that grace, freer than I ever was on earth. Because love, true love, is not found in being adored, but in adoring the one who first loved you. So if you ever hear my story, remember this. Let your heart dance before the Lord. Even if no one understands. Even if the world mocks you. Even if it costs your crown. For only those who bow low will rise high in his presence. I am Michal, the daughter of a king, the wife of a worshipper. And the woman who learned too late. That dignity without devotion is empty. But by mercy, I dance still. Michal's story reminds us that it's not enough to be close to the presence of God, we must enter it with humility and love. She was a woman of royalty, beauty, and tragedy, but her life whispers a timeless truth. Never stand at the window when heaven is calling you to worship. Let your heart dance before the Lord. Subscribe for more cinematic Bible stories from Faith Circle for Women. Like, share and comment your thoughts below.